She didn't even lower her voice. I was standing at the entrance of 12, one of those Riverview restaurants in Chicago where the candles cost more than my grocery bill used to. It was November 14th, 2022, a Tuesday night, cold enough that my breath was visible in the air outside, and I remember thinking, just for a second, that I should have called ahead. That showing up like this was already a mistake. But I had something of hers, a small black box she'd left behind when she cleared out the last of her things from my apartment 3 weeks earlier. Nothing dramatic inside. A USB drive, some documents, things I thought she might need. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to return something that belonged to her, and then I was going to leave. I spotted her before she spotted me. She was seated toward the back near the window. Candlelight. A man across from her, older, broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of suit that doesn't come off a rack. He was saying something that made her laugh, and I stood there for a moment, watching her laugh the way she used to laugh with me, except lighter somehow. Like she'd traded in the version of herself that carried weight for one that only knew how to float. Then she turned and saw me. Her face didn't fall. It didn't soften. It went still. The way a room goes still when someone walks in who isn't supposed to be there. She said something to the man across from her, something quick and quiet that made him glance toward the entrance, and then she stood up and walked toward me. Heels. A dress I had never seen. A face that had already made a decision before she reached me. She stopped close enough that nobody around us could hear, and then she said it. "This is embarrassing. Can you please just leave?" No question mark. Not a request. A removal. I looked at her for a moment. Really looked. At the ring on her right hand, not engagement, just jewelry, but heavy and gold and new. At the way she was holding her shoulders, high and tight, like she was bracing for a scene I hadn't come to make. At the space between us that used to be ours and now felt like a border. I placed the box on the host stand near the entrance, didn't say a word, turned around and walked back out into the November air. For a moment, nobody moved. The door closed behind me. The cold hit my face, and I stood on the sidewalk outside that restaurant and did something I didn't expect. I laughed. Not the laugh of someone who thinks something is funny. The laugh of someone who finally, completely, understands something they should have understood a long time ago. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Because that moment, the candlelight, the dress, the 8 words she chose, wasn't the story. It was just the last page of a chapter that had been writing itself for 3 years without me fully reading it. But that moment didn't start there. It started with a rain-soaked Tuesday in March of 2019. A woman who cried because someone showed up for her when she didn't ask. And a version of me that believed, with everything I had, that love was the only investment that never lost value. I was wrong about that. And being wrong about it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Stay with me. Because what happened next, I still can't fully explain. Except to say that the moment she told me to leave was the moment I finally started arriving. I met Danielle Reeves on a Tuesday morning in March of 2019, at the Fullerton Avenue Red Line station on Chicago's North Side. It was raining the way Chicago rains in early spring. Not dramatically, not poetically, just cold and sideways, and completely indifferent to whatever you had planned. I had a client meeting in 40 minutes. My umbrella had broken 2 days earlier, and I hadn't replaced it. I was standing under the narrow ledge of the station entrance, doing the mental math of how wet I was willing to get, when I noticed a woman next to me doing the exact same calculation. We both looked at the rain. We both looked at each other. She laughed first. That was Danielle. She was finishing her MBA at DePaul at the time, sharp, organized, The kind of person who color-coded her calendar and still somehow always seemed to be running 5 minutes behind. I was 27, 3 years into building a small independent tech consultancy out of a one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. No investors, no safety net. Just a laptop, a handful of contracts, and a level of stubbornness that most people in my life had stopped trying to argue with. We were broke together in those early years, and I want to be honest about something. It felt like freedom. We split $12 pizzas and called it date night. We walked everywhere because parking in Chicago is a form of financial violence. We stayed up until 2 in the morning, talking about what we were building, what we wanted, what kind of life we were pointed toward. She had plans. I had plans. And for a long time, those plans felt like they were pointing in the same direction. I want you to understand who I was in that relationship. Not to make myself a saint, but because what came later only makes sense if you know what came before. In the fall of 2019, Danielle's mother needed emergency dental surgery. The cost was $4,200. Her mother didn't have it. Danielle didn't have it. I had it. Barely, and only because I'd been sitting on a small emergency fund I'd built one slow month at a time. I paid for it without being asked. I didn't announce it. I didn't frame it as sacrifice. I just handled it, because that's what you do when someone you love needs something handled. She cried for 20 minutes when she found out. Said she had never had anyone show up for her like that. The following spring, a contract came through for a project in Seattle. $67,000, 6 months of solid work. I turned it down. Her mother was still recovering. Danielle was finishing her thesis. I didn't want to be 1,200 miles away during a hard season. I told myself there would be other contracts. I told myself the right choice was always the one that kept the people you loved close. I still believe that. I just understand now that the other person has to be making the same choice. She wasn't. She just hadn't told me yet. And that's the thing about slow betrayals. They don't arrive like a storm. They arrive like a season change. You don't notice until one morning you wake up and everything that was warm is just quietly, completely gone. The first time I knew something was wrong, I didn't say anything. It was a Tuesday evening in December of 2021. I was at my desk when I heard the front door open. I checked my phone. 1:47 a.m. I wasn't angry. I was the kind of worried that sits quietly in your chest and doesn't make noise because it doesn't want to start something it can't finish. I asked where she'd been. She set her purse down, didn't look at me, and said something that I have replayed probably 1,000 times since. I need you to understand that I'm growing, and I need people around me who match that. I asked what that meant for us. She said, I don't know yet. And then she went to bed. And I sat at my desk in the dark and told myself it was stress, that she was tired, that people say things at 1 a.m. that they don't fully mean. I told myself every comfortable lie that a person tells themselves when the truth is sitting right there in the room and they're just not ready to look at it directly. The months that followed were a slow execution dressed up as distance. She stopped touching me. Not in one dramatic moment, but gradually, the way a fire doesn't explode out, it just stops producing heat. She started coming home later. She started going to events I wasn't invited to. Events she described as networking, professional development, industry circles. New clothes appeared in the closet. New names entered her conversations. And one name started appearing more than the others. Marcus. She introduced him in October of 2021 as a professional contact. Commercial real estate developer. 41 years old. The kind of man who exists in rooms where decisions get made over handshakes and scotch. She mentioned him casually at first. The way you mention weather, or traffic, or something that isn't supposed to require a response. I noticed. I said nothing. I trusted her, and I want to be clear about that because it matters. I chose trust. I didn't snoop. I didn't follow. I didn't make accusations. I gave her exactly what I would have wanted if our positions had been reversed. Then in January of 2022, I found a card in the pocket of her coat. A thank you note, handwritten. The handwriting was clean and deliberate, the kind that belongs to someone who went to the right schools. It said, "You deserve everything you've been missing." I put it back, said nothing. April 2022 was when she sat me down. Not on the couch, not casually, at the kitchen table, like a meeting. Hands folded, eyes steady. "I think we want different things. I need security, real security. You're still figuring things out." I told her I was building something, that it takes time. She said, "Marcus doesn't need time. He's already there." First time she'd ever said his name to my face like that. Like a comparison. Like a verdict. She packed a bag that night. Not everything, just enough to make a statement. And at the door she turned and said the sentence that I have carried in my chest like a stone ever since. "I love you, but love doesn't pay for the life I want." The door closed. The apartment went silent. I sat down on the kitchen floor and stayed there for 4 hours. Didn't call anyone. Didn't cry. Just sat in the specific silence of a life that had just changed shape without asking my permission. And I made a decision sitting on that floor. Not revenge, not anger. Something quieter and far more dangerous. I gave myself 1 week to feel it. All of it. Not because I had a plan. Not because I was already thinking 3 steps ahead the way people do in movies when they get hurt and immediately transform into someone focused and dangerous. I gave myself 1 week because I understood, somewhere underneath the pain, that grief that doesn't get felt doesn't disappear. It just moves into the walls. And I had spent enough of my life living in spaces that were quietly falling apart without anyone admitting it. So I felt it. Every single day of that week. And then on the 8th morning I got up, made coffee, and decided that the hurt had done its job. I moved out of the apartment we had shared and into a smaller place in Wicker Park. $950 a month. 1 bedroom. Clean walls. A window that faced east so the morning light came in early and honest. I wrote 3 words on a note card and taped it directly above my monitor, where I would see it every single time I sat down to work. Finish what started. That was the whole plan. Not win, not prove anything to anyone. Just finish what I had already begun before she became a reason to pause. And then something happened that I had almost forgotten was possible. In May of 2022, 3 weeks after I moved into that apartment, an email arrived from a federal contractor I had never spoken to directly. 18 months earlier, in the middle of everything falling apart with clients and revenue and Danielle slowly leaving before she physically left, I had submitted a proprietary data integration framework to a government tech procurement registry. It was a long shot. The kind of submission you make because the opportunity exists, and you have nothing to lose. And then you put it in a drawer in your mind and stop checking it. The email said they wanted to discuss my framework for a federal pilot program. That pilot was worth $340,000 over 18 months. I read the email 4 times. Then I replied within the hour. Then I closed my laptop, put on my jacket, and walked along the lakefront for 45 minutes in the cold because I needed my body to understand something my mind was still processing. That the thing she said I was still figuring out had just been figured out. Without her. Quietly. in a one-bedroom apartment she didn't know existed. I said yes to the contract. I worked in silence. I hired my first employee, Jordan Mills, 26 years old, a software engineer who was sharp and hungry and reminded me of myself 3 years earlier, except smarter and significantly better rested. We worked out of a co-working space in the West Loop. We didn't talk about vision statements or 5-year roadmaps. We just built things that worked and delivered them on time and let the quality speak at a volume neither of us had to manufacture. November came. The restaurant happened. She told me to leave. I drove home that night, made coffee, opened my laptop, and worked until 3 in the morning. December arrived, and with it something I did not expect. A Venmo notification. $500. From Danielle. The note read, "For your consultancy. Hope things are looking up. Truly." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed the money. The federal contract had already cleared its first payment. I stared at it because of what it meant. That in her mind, I was still the version of me she had left. Still struggling. Still figuring it out. Still someone who could be managed with $500 and a word like truly. I declined the payment. No message. No explanation. Just declined. She sent $500 to save me. I was already building something she couldn't buy a seat at. January 2023 arrived like a confirmation. A second federal contract came through. $210,000. I hired 2 more engineers. We moved out of the co-working space and into a real office on Michigan Avenue. 11th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. On clear mornings, you could see Lake Michigan from my desk, flat and steel blue and indifferent to everything happening on land. And I found that indifference oddly comforting. The lake didn't care who you used to be. It just kept showing up. I stopped checking Danielle's social media sometime around February. Not as a discipline exercise. Not because someone told me it would help. I stopped because I realized one afternoon that I had opened her profile out of pure habit and felt absolutely nothing looking at it. No anger, no longing, no satisfaction, no pain. Just the mild blankness of looking at something that no longer had anything to do with your life. I closed it and never went back. I started running again. 5 in the morning, lakefront, regardless of weather. I cut my hair, bought new clothes, not to signal anything to anyone, not to perform a transformation for an audience, but because I was becoming someone new and it felt right that the outside should eventually catch up to what was happening on the inside. In March of 2023, a technology publication reached out for a feature profile. A journalist had found the federal contracts through public procurement records and wanted to understand the story behind them. The piece was called Chicago's Quietest Disruptors. I agreed to the interview. I sat across from the journalist in my Michigan Avenue office with Lake Michigan behind me, and I told her the truth, that I had gotten very quiet, and then I had gotten very good, and that sometimes those two things are the same move. The article published in early April. It traveled further than any of us expected. 2 national business outlets picked it up. A venture capital firm in San Francisco sent an introductory email within 72 hours. My phone didn't stop for 3 days. And somewhere in all of that noise, she saw it. A text arrived in May from a number I didn't have saved. I knew before I opened it. I saw the article. I always knew you had it in you. I'm really proud of you. I read it twice. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, a Venmo request arrived from the same number. $200. No note. I checked the profile out of instinct. She and Marcus were no longer listed together anywhere on social media. The carefully curated life, the galas, the The restaurant photos, the jewelry, the version of herself she had traded me in to access, had gone noticeably, unmistakably quiet. I declined the request. Still no message. Then in June she called. I picked up. Not because I wanted to reconnect, because I wanted to close something properly. The way you close a window before a storm. Not out of fear, just out of order. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. She said she had made a mistake, that she hadn't understood what she was leaving, that what we had was real, and she had treated it like it was replaceable, and she knew that now. She asked if we could talk, really talk. I let her finish. Every word. I didn't interrupt. I didn't sigh. I just listened the way you listen to something that used to matter enormously and now lands at a strange, bearable distance. Then I spoke. Danielle, I'm good. I genuinely hope you are too. She started to cry, asked if there was anything left between us. No. I hung up, sat at my desk. Lake Michigan in the distance, same as always. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not sadness, not relief exactly. Just completion. The specific quiet of a chapter that has fully, finally, ended. She called expecting the version of me she left. That version doesn't live here anymore. In the weeks after that phone call, the world kept moving the way it does, without asking anyone's permission and without pausing to acknowledge what just ended. I heard about Marcus through Priya Sharma, a mutual contact who had stayed carefully neutral through everything. She messaged me sometime in late June, prefacing it with the kind of hesitation that means someone has been sitting on information for a while and finally decided you deserve to know. Marcus had lost 3 major commercial properties in a bad refinancing deal. The restructuring had been going on quietly for months. A local Chicago business blog picked it up briefly. 4 paragraphs, buried. But enough for the people who were paying attention to understand that the empire that had dazzled Danielle into leaving her life behind had been built on leverage that didn't hold. I wrote back 2 sentences. I hope they figure it out, genuinely. And I meant it, which surprised me a little. But that's what real forward motion feels like. You stop needing other people's collapse to feel like your rise means something. Danielle moved back into a studio apartment on the north side. I didn't go looking for that information. It found me, the way information always finds you in a city where enough people know your name. The charity galas disappeared from her feed. The restaurant photos stopped. The carefully constructed image of a woman who had upgraded her life went quiet in the specific way that things go quiet when the thing funding them runs out. I thought about her sometimes. Not with anger, not with longing. Just the way you occasionally think about a season you passed through. Acknowledging that it happened. Acknowledging that it shaped something, and then returning to the present because the present is where everything worth having actually lives. The VC firm from San Francisco flew me out in July. 2 days of meetings in a glass building in Soma, with people who asked sharp questions and listened carefully to the answers. I took a minority deal, enough runway to scale the company properly, not enough to lose the thing that made it worth scaling in the first place. Jordan got promoted. We hired 7 people total. The Michigan Avenue office started feeling like something real, rather than something I was pretending into existence. And the box. I keep coming back to the box. The small black one I placed on the host stand at 12 on that November night when she told me this was embarrassing. What was inside it was a USB drive containing every document she had ever asked me to help her with during her MBA. Financial models, case studies, research frameworks, the outline of her thesis that we had rebuilt together on a Saturday afternoon when she was 2 weeks from deadline and completely lost. I had digitized everything, organized it by year, labeled it cleanly. I had brought it because even at the end, even knowing what I knew, that's who I was. The person who shows up with the thing you didn't know you still needed. The host stand almost certainly threw it away. Good. Some things are better released than returned. It has been a little over a year since that phone call. I want to tell you where things stand, not to perform a victory lap, not to prove anything to anyone who doubted me, but because this story deserves an honest ending, and honest endings require the full truth, not just the parts that sound clean. The company cleared $1.2 million in revenue last fiscal year. We have a real team now, people who are talented and invested and show up every morning because they believe in what we are building, not because they have nowhere else to go. The Michigan Avenue office has a second room. Jordan runs engineering. I spend most of my time on strategy and partnerships, and the occasional 5 a.m. run along the lakefront when I need to think through something that doesn't have a clean answer yet. I am seeing someone. I won't say much about her, because she deserves more than a footnote in someone else's story. What I will say is this. She asks how my day went. Every evening. And then she actually listens to the answer. She doesn't treat my ambition like a threat or my silence like a problem to be solved. She just shows up, consistently and without condition. And I had forgotten how rare that is until I was standing inside it again. I think about Danielle sometimes. Less than I used to. Differently than I used to. What I understand now, and what took me longer to understand than I would like to admit, is that she didn't break me. She clarified me. She stripped away every comfortable assumption I had been carrying about what love looks like when it's tested, and what loyalty means when it costs something, and what it feels like to be in a relationship where only one person is actually choosing the other one every single day. The $500 Venmo. The pride text after the article. The $200 request. The tearful phone call. All of it, every gesture she made after she left, was her attempting to stay tethered to something she had already cut loose. I was never her great love in those final months. I was her benchmark. The standard she had walked away from and then spent 2 years measuring everyone else against, quietly, without ever saying it out loud. She chose money over me. I understand that choice now without bitterness. She wanted a life that felt certain, and certainty is a seductive thing when you have spent years watching someone build in the dark without a guarantee. But here is what she didn't understand, and what I want to leave you with. The building in the dark is the point. The uncertainty is where the real thing gets made. Anyone can show up when the lights are on and the table is set and the outcome is already visible. What matters, what has always mattered, is who stays in the room when none of that is true yet. She left that room. I stayed in it. She chose money over me. I chose myself instead. Turns out, that was the better investment. If this story landed somewhere real for you, you already know what to do. Drop a comment. Tell me yours. And if you are somewhere in the middle of your own rebuild right now, in the dark, uncertain, doing the work without any guarantee of what comes next, keep going. The silence is part of the process. The building is the point. And the version of you waiting on the other side of this is worth every single difficult, quiet, unglamorous day it takes to get there.